So I want to preface this by saying Tron Legacy was one of my favorite movies growing up. And I think the original one from 1982, I think, is pretty good too. I don't watch it very often, but it's kind of a fun, silly time. So I feel like I'm qualified to give a review of Tron Ares. Now the first thing that I want to mention, and that I probably titled the video, is that Tron is not in this movie. This is a Tron movie without Tron. I don't think he's even mentioned once in the movie. It's very weird to have a movie where the title character's not even in it. And I think Jared Leto's character, Ares, is meant to fill Tron's role, because Ares is like this perfect soldier, kind of like Tron, who was designed to fight the Master Controller. And Ares goes through this arc of learning to become human, basically. And that's where my biggest problem with this movie comes in, is that it ignores everything that the last movie did and set up. So that ending with the ISOs and Sam Flynn taking back the company, that's completely gone. We're focusing on something else. Those characters aren't even in this movie at all. They are mentioned briefly in the starting exposition, and they show up in a photograph at the end. I think Ares is looking for them. He's going on like this world tour at the end. So the main character of Tron Legacy, Sam Flynn, at the end of the second movie, he decided that he would take back NCOM. And that movie takes place in 2010. This movie takes place in 2025. And Sam Flynn apparently abandoned the company during that time. So his whole arc in that Tron Legacy movie, he gave that up sometime within 15 years after that movie took place, because there's a new CEO of NCOM who is one of the main characters of this movie, and it seemed like she'd been there a while, so they kind of reversed Sam Flynn's character arc within like a couple of years after the end of the first movie. Another thing they abandoned is, in Tron Legacy, on the NCOM board of directors, there is an Edward Dillinger Jr., who is supposed to be Ed Dillinger's son. But now, this movie follows a Julian Dillinger as the villain, who is supposed to be Ed Dillinger's grandson. So instead of this Ed Dillinger Jr. being on the board at NCOM, the continuity is now that Ed Dillinger left the company and started his own, and they're kind of just erasing Ed Dillinger Jr. from the canon, or saying he was someone else. I think they changed it on the wiki, because if you look at the timeline, it's not really possible for Julian Dillinger to be Edward Dillinger Jr.'s son. Another key factor of this movie is something called the permanence code, where programs can only be in the real world for 29 minutes. And it's kind of a race between NCOM and Dillinger Systems to create the permanence code that will allow these programs to stay in the real world permanently. And the NCOM CEO ends up finding that code in Flynn's old server, which means he cracked this problem like 40 years ago that these massive billion-dollar corporations couldn't do with all of our modern tech, which doesn't really make sense. And also in Tron Legacy, the whole point of Clue's mission was he wanted to get Flynn's disk so he could go out into the real world with his army and like conquer it and stuff. But did the permanence code exist in that server? Because if not, his invasion into the real world would have only lasted 29 minutes and the whole movie would have been kind of pointless, because why would you need to stop him? We saw in Tron Ares that the permanence code did exist in Flynn's server from the 80s, so I guess you could make the argument that if it was in that server, maybe it was in whatever server Tron Legacy was on. But there's also some weird continuity with that, because Flynn's server in this movie is implied to be the same one from the first movie, but the server that Flynn went into in the first movie was NCOM's server, not his personal one. But then Tron Legacy was implied to be a Flynn's personal server. But in this movie, when Ares goes into Flynn's server, it's the 80s one that's supposed to be NCOM's server. So I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if the permanence code was in Legacy's server. I don't know if it was the same server as the one from the 80s. It certainly did not look the same, especially in this movie. So I don't know. There's no continuity here. I would also like to point out, when Ares left Flynn's server from the 80s, Flynn opened a back door for him. But if you remember from Tron Legacy, Flynn was stuck in the server for like 15 years. 15, 20 years, because there was only one door, there was only one portal, and it was only open for a very limited time, because it used a ton of power to keep the door open. So it doesn't make sense for there to be a back door, or else the second movie wouldn't have happened. And also, the key to that door was Flynn's disc, which Ares definitely did not have. I also don't like that the storyline of this movie also ended in essentially the same place that Legacy's storyline ended, with the main character deciding to stay or become the NCOM leader, CEO, and a program going out into the real world to discover life, basically. Both movies end pretty much in exactly the same spot. Also, I know Jared Leto is supposed to be playing a program who is just like learning to become human over the course of the movie, but even when he does become more human, I don't think he shows a single human emotion. Like, his acting was completely flat for the entire movie. So I did like the plot of the movie. I liked the plot of the AI learning to become human and wanting permanence, and like discovering that to be human is not to be permanent. And then you have this like overarching conflict between the two companies, EDCOM and Dillinger Systems. And then you have a nice setup for a villain with Evan Peters' character, Julian Dillinger. Evan Peters is a great actor. I like him. I also think the soundtrack of this movie was really good. Of course, you can't match Legacy's soundtrack because that is just one-of-a-kind brilliance, but it was still really good, and the visual effects were great. They were essentially perfect, I think. I complain a lot about visual effects nowadays because they kind of take me out of the movie when they don't look realistic, but I think these effects were as close to perfect as you can get. So this movie has a lot of spectacle, which is good because that's what I want from a Tron movie. Problem is, it feels limited because of that self-imposed rule of programs can only be in the real world for 29 minutes, and most of this movie takes place in the real world instead of on the grid. You're given that spectacle in small doses. Like, it doesn't feel grand or big in scale. Like in both of the previous movies, you had light cycle battles where you had like 4 or 5 light cycles fighting all at once on the grid. In this movie, the most you get is 2, and they're just on a street in Denver, I think this movie takes place, instead of in this like cool visual world of the grid. The grid looks great when they're on it, but they are almost never on it. And as much as I like the ideas of the story, I don't think the story or the acting or the dialogue was all that strong. So it's the spectacle that it really has to rely on to sell you on the movie, but it doesn't live up to the previous 2 movies in terms of spectacle. So it ends up just being kind of mediocre. I also think this movie feels long, but it's packed with stuff, so it doesn't feel like it's wasting time. I did find myself checking the time on my phone a couple times, which is probably not a good sign. So overall, I'm not happy with the changes they made to the canon and like the direction they went with the story, ignoring the previous movies, abandoning storylines. There's some flat acting in this. Plot was like so-so. Visual effects were good. Overall, I'd say it's a pretty okay movie. I wouldn't call it great. It's a flat movie carried by the spectacle, and it does look like this movie is going to bomb. It did pretty bad on its opening weekend. I think it made like 40 million or something like that, which, you know, that tracks with the last 2 movies. Both of the last 2 movies were considered bombs when they came out, but then people began to appreciate them over time, which is why they got sequels so far apart. Like Tron Legacy came 20, 30 years after the first one, then this one came 15 years after Legacy. So I think that this movie will probably develop that same underground appreciation from audiences, and they'll probably try to make another one in like 10 years. But I'm hoping they learn from their mistakes on this one and go back to the grid, because if they can't create a strong story, they need that spectacle and not in that small 29-minute dose. I would say though that this is better than a lot of other Disney movies that have come out recently, but that's not exactly a high bar to clear. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the sequel to one of my favorite movies. I have very mixed feelings about it. I don't hate it. It's not what I wanted, obviously. I don't even know if I'd recommend it, but it's a decent watch. Maybe watch it when it comes out on Disney Plus. I think you'll have a good time. But anyway, that's about it for me. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.